Yeah, just to introduce a few things. I got involved in radical politics when I was in school in 1972, and I remember being invited to a Palestine solidarity demonstration which had to be cancelled because of the Munich Olympics. So that was where I started. But in 1973, I was thinking about sexuality and stuff, and there was National Gay Pride Week, but most importantly, the Builders Labourers Federation took strike action at Macquarie University to defend a gay student. And this, they'd already been doing green bans. And why I say green bans is this is really important in generating the Greens in Germany and around the world, is from this moment. But they did this first industrial action to support a gay student at Macquarie University. It's the first time anywhere in the world a union went on strike to defend a gay man or a lesbian who was not a member. So unions had taken action to defend members, but this time it was like a real step forward in terms of, social movement unionism. And it made waves globally, and like I said, it's got ongoing significance. So that was a really key moment for me, because until that moment, I couldn't link the struggle against imperialism or the class struggle. I couldn't understand why it would be linked with feminism or homosexuality. So I'm just trying to say the times. Now, I'm going to use the words of identity at the time. So in the early 70s, we transitioned from being camp, which is a very old English word, and homosexual, to an American identity called gay, which was a very politicised identity and more inclusive, and also lesbian and dyke again from America. So when I say gay was inclusive, it was inclusive of identities that now would be seen as transgender. So we talked, you couldn't ask someone, but my friends were female impersonators, radical drag queens, drag kings, transvestites, transsexuals, real women. You know what I mean? Like if you asked, you used the pronoun that was appropriate for their presentation at the time, and if you asked, you'd get slapped. So if I'm saying gay, you've got to understand I'm using it as the time. I want to say that the first Mardi Gras comes at the end of a revolutionary decade globally. And if people don't sort of recognise the global context, it doesn't sort of work. So you have gay liberation and women's liberation born in France and Mexico and the United States, or reborn at the end of 1969, after anti-war movement, civil rights movement in the United States, but a revolutionary wave in the Soviet bloc, in what was called the Third World, and in advanced capitalist countries in 1968, which generates revolutionary politics around feminism and gay liberation in a lot of countries, not just in America. So you've got this enormous transition. Now, that decade is marked by revolutions in the early 70s in Portugal and Spain and in the Portuguese colonies, in Biafra, in Bangladesh. But it ends in 1979 with revolutions in Iran, Afghanistan, Grenada, Nicaragua. I've forgotten. But the key moment is Vietnamese unification in 1975. Now, why I'm saying that is the revolutionary movement in Australia and women's liberation and gay liberation are dependent on this global context. Now, also democratic rights is expanding, unlike now. And you've got this key moment in the expansion of reproductive rights. So there's no point in talking about gay liberation unless it's materially grounded that you've got contraception and abortion in the late 60s and early 70s that transformed sexual politics. And capitalism itself is changing the gendered division of labour. So we have a movement that's very subtle, which says things like smash the family, smash masculinity, smash heteronormativity, all of smash patriarchy. We were very subtle, It wasn't about reforms. So it was about oppression and liberation. We believed in an autonomous movement, that is an autonomous movement of women, but also an autonomous movement of gay people, and take forward the struggle. We believed. I have to be. Other people in the room must have read Althusser, right? No, okay. We believed in ideological state apparatus. So the struggle wasn't only against the state. The struggle was against religion, media, sport, judiciary, all of it. And in fact, the early movement was aimed primarily against psychiatry rather than the state itself. So also at the time, setting the scene, Neville Wran was elected, we didn't know he was gay, as a Labor Premier after Askin, who was running a big organised crime syndicate that ran the state with Stella Gilroy, who was the Catholic cardinal. And so this transition, Wran, for whatever reason, said he would have to close the illegal gambling casinos and the SP bookies. And so overnight, Abe Saffron, who ran the syndicate, reopened the casinos as gay bars. So there was a sudden growth in the commercial gay sector in Oxford Street. If you want all the details, I can tell you. Now, back to Mardi Gras. So I was in what was then the Socialist Workers' Party, which at the time, thank God, was Trotskyist. And a comrade of mine migrated to San Francisco, a lesbian comrade, and got involved in the struggle against the Briggs Initiative, which was a referendum by the Christian right to remove any supporter of gay rights from any job in the California school system. And everyone assumed it would pass. And there was two struggles against it. One run by The Advocate, which was a gay newspaper, which was purely about civil liberties and democratic rights and very respectable in the Democratic Party. Another wing was Harvey Milk, who'd been elected as a Democrat to the City Council in San Francisco, which was about alliance with unions and alliance with African Americans, Asian Americans, women's movement, students, and gay visibility and mass action. So they were aiming for a million people on 24th of June in San Francisco to demonstrate against the Briggs Initiative. And so Trotskyists in San Francisco wrote to me and a woman named Anne Talve in the Socialist Workers' Party saying, we need solidarity. And of course we didn't know what to do. So we called a meeting of all the gay groups and all the left groups at Sydney University, SRC. And of course some of the gay groups were immensely conservative in terms of religion or Liberal Party or business or whatever. You know, it was a real spectrum. And of course we had like radical feminists and, you know, a big range. And we wanted to do a forum on internationalism, which we did, and we decided we'd have a street march. And we'd been remarkably unsuccessful in street marches. But we had a march on the Saturday morning with about 500 people, which to date was the largest gay and lesbian demonstration in Australia. And putting the tribes together was a really big nightmare. I had Jacob Gabay from the Jewish group Chutzpah next to me with a fucking enormous Israeli flag, and I made him take it down because I said it's not a symbol of Judaism, it's a symbol of apartheid. That was in the first Mardi Gras. Fuck knows what's going to happen on Saturday. But yeah, putting together lesbians and leathermen and all of that, and Liberal Party people and Catholics didn't work very well. But we survived. But people from the Communist Party and CAMP, which was a big organisation established in 1970, and radicals at Sydney University, a group called Ad Hoc, were keen on having a celebration. So if you went to the street march in the morning and you were photographed, you'd have trouble with your family, with your job, with education. The idea was people could go out at night in masks or costumes, it would be at night, be a celebration, wouldn't be a hardline demo. And we got police permission to do it. From Taylor Square down to what's now Whitlam Square, to have a bit of a party. And, like, we're really dumb. Like, how dumb can you be? Like, this is the territory of organised crime and the police. You know, like, and we're there at 10:30. And, of course, the police changed their minds. And they're moving us down the street really fast, and then they stop us at Hyde Park, and spontaneously we do what we did on the Herzog rally. We go down College Street and up to King's Cross, and then when we're dispersing, they kettle us. After we're dispersing, and start arresting lesbians. I don't know why they picked lesbians. I think they thought they wouldn't fight back. That was a really dumb idea. And then, of course, all the people, except queens like me, I was in a polka dot dress, all the people in the street, like Indigenous people and sex workers and people using heroin, it was like a big carnival. Like, the police were fighting, so why not? The end result was hundreds of people were arrested, but only 53 were in the paddy wagons. And then we spent all night getting people bailed out, because I know you're all young, but there were no mobile phones. There were no ATMs. Like, to get bail money, you had to ring or go and get cash. And so it was a big nightmare. So immediately, there's two political dynamics come out of it. One is, on the Sunday, there's a crisis. This is the first time lesbian and gay rights is a central political issue in Australia. Like, front page, big drama. The second is, people have been arrested for peaceful assembly. So it's just like Queensland, except it's a Labor government. And so then the unions and most of the Labor Party and the women's movement and the student movement and civil libertarians, everybody on the progressive part of society goes, oh shit, this is a really big problem. And so you've got two struggles happening simultaneously to drop the charges, and we keep getting more and more people arrested. And eventually we get the charges dropped, and we get summary offences, 1970, which was a law which, Jean might talk about. It was used massively against lesbians displaying affection in public, gay men having sex, but about sex workers, Indigenous people in public, and people drinking, and witchcraft. Anyway, that was all good. We got that repealed. It was reintroduced. 3 new laws were introduced to replace summary offences in 79. The momentum from that led to the inclusion of homosexuality and anti-discrimination. We were the second legislature in the world to do that after Quebec. Remember Trotsky's theory of uneven and combined development. And then we had partial repeal of the anti-buggery law, which was sex between men carried a penalty of 14 years jail and a whipping until 1984 in New South Wales. I should say the repeal in New South Wales predates the repeal of these laws in most United States jurisdictions. But at the time, the penalty for rape was 7 years. So consenting sex between men was twice as dangerous as rape. The alliances stood. We had a whole lot of new groups founded in 78, like the Gay Trade Union Group, which went on to do an enormous amount of work. We had the Mardi Gras in 79 against the gay business, gay media and gay groups. Like, it was the left that carried it forward. We were after law reform, but we were after law reform that limited the power of the state rather than appeal to the state to do what we wanted for us. I don't know if I can explain that a bit better. Gay Solidarity Group went on around law reform. It began radio, did work with prisoners. It had campaigns against racism in the gay community, around Indigenous rights, particularly the bicentenary, around uranium and nuclear war, played a key role in the anti-apartheid movement, solidarity with Central America. We had struggles in solidarity with Greece, United Kingdom around Thatcher, Russia and India, around gay stuff. We set up Coalition Against Repression, which defeated moral majority in Australia in the early 80s. Campaign Gays Against Racism, Gay and Lesbian Immigration Task Force, which made an enormous victory in same-sex couples in 1985. Again, we were the second country in the world to recognise same-sex relationships. Gay Liberation Choir, which was heavily political, and Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. But then we had AIDS in New South Wales from 1982, so the whole politics changes. Now, just on Mardi Gras now, I think Mardi Gras is really, really important in terms of solidarity and political messages and political solidarity. It's important in terms of satire, which is now illegal. It's about sexuality, it's about rebellion against oppression. That's what I value Mardi Gras. If people ask me what are my values for Mardi Gras, that's it. It's good. You see the reaction of the crowds around sexual tribes, around queer groups, around students, around unions, and unions are often not allowed, around sporting groups, around groups of volunteers, most importantly around workers, around international or ethnic groups, some political parties and some religious groups. What the crowds don't like is the big business advertising floats, and by and large the crowds don't like the state government or the police in uniform. Now, Mardi Gras has gone into crisis about the party. The political economy of Mardi Gras, I've got a minute?
You can keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
The political economy of Mardi Gras is there's money from us as taxpayers goes in some way to Mardi Gras, but Mardi Gras' resources are driven by volunteer contributions. So it's the community, it's community energy and money, right? And then in return for all of that, retail, hospitality and travel companies get an enormous amount of profit in Mardi Gras. So that's the essential political economy. So when the Liberal Party says stop funding Mardi Gras, Labor says, are you crazy? This is going to ruin profits from tourism in Sydney. Now, the political economy of the party is different. Now, it's hard to run parties now, particularly when you're not allowed to have sex or drugs. So the party now costs too much in terms of venue insurance, security, the policing arrangements, and you can't get big acts. So the party's collapsed, and it may be because the business model doesn't work or because the Mardi Gras leadership is totally incompetent. What happened in the last year is, I think, Premier Minns, who's very sensitive to criticism around drugs, protest laws, police violence, sex worker stuff to some extent, failure of equality legislation, and Israel, has engineered a campaign run by Peter Murphy, the Secretary of the International League of People's Struggles, just in case anyone wondered if he was still a Maoist. He's run a campaign with the Liberal Party and Labor Party to take over Mardi Gras and exclude the left. And the basis was we want to include everybody, but really only the police and big business. So they sort of got people elected. They got ALP and Liberal people elected to the board, but Pride in Protest got the highest primary vote for the election. Pride in Protest got a number of resolutions passed, and other resolutions around police in Israel lost very narrowly. So now Mardi Gras is trying to undermine their own democracy, I think, in order to protect the reputation of our Premier. And so I think we're in a really difficult political moment. And at the Mardi Gras coming, there's been like Dayenu, the Jewish group, withdrew and then went back in. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means for Jews that are not in Dayenu. And most of the Jews I know have always been excluded from Dayenu. I don't know what's going to happen. Mardi Gras does a lot of censorship. So now Mardi Gras is saying you're not allowed to satirise any figure in public life. Yeah, really. So I don't know what's going to happen with Mardi Gras and the police in terms of removing any mentions of genocide, apartheid, river to the sea or intifada. So I think a lot of us are really tense about Saturday night because for the last 5 years, censorship on behalf of Mardi Gras itself, on behalf of the broadcasters, on behalf of the police, on behalf of the state government, maybe the city council, and sponsors, is getting tighter and tighter. Now, if Mardi Gras doesn't have any sexuality, it doesn't have any groups of workers that are there as workers rather than advertising fucking Amex or Amazon, if it doesn't have any satire or humour or creativity, yes, you get Moomba. You get Moomba. Sorry if I'm offending anyone from Victoria. But you get a family-friendly thing with, big retailers having shows. And that sort of defeats the purpose.
Yeah, it's so awesome to have Ken here, who literally was one of the people who spearheaded what has become such a massive institution in Australia. And we've actually done branch meetings before about the hidden radical history of Mardi Gras, which is always worth revisiting. But the meeting today is a little bit more specific, and that is that we are 2.5 weeks out from a protest that had, incredible mass defiance against attempts to shut down a march and against expressing our views about a genocide, but also incredible police brutality. And in that sense, it's very, very similar to the immediate aftermath of the 1978 Mardi Gras, where there was, both an incredible mass resistance against the cops and, the New South Wales Summary Offences Act that had suppressed, gay people, as Ken said, in a very broad understanding of that term. Savage beatings, including tragically the aforementioned Peter Murphy, but also, also that resistance. And so, we wanted to learn some of those lessons from how did the Mardi Gras go forward. So what I wanted to do, just to start off, to bring us up to date in terms of where we're at, after the Herzog protest, is to think about what happened immediately after Bondi, because that's where the Herzog visit comes from. Thinking about what Gillian Siegel, Anthony Albanese, Chris Minns wanted to do when Bondi happened. And I think that agenda was to attempt to wipe out the historical understanding of the hundreds of thousands of us who marched across the Harbour Bridge, and that symbol of the mass of humanity with Palestinian flags representing the Australian community against genocide. They wanted to wipe that out and replace it with what they did in October 2023, which was to light up the Opera House with the Israeli flag. They wanted to wipe out that history of resistance and movement building for Palestine. What did they do straight after Bondi? Immediately it was to slander every one of us who marched over the bridge, and to create a repressive regime to try and drive us off the streets, and a serious attempt to end the weekly and ongoing Palestine protests and marches, but also to intimidate and criminalise pro-Palestinian sentiment. So, federally we've got the Siegel Plan, which is a Trump-like attempt to force universities to compete with each other about who's going to smash the on-campus Palestine movement hardest. We've got the anti-hate group laws from Albanese. And at the state level, from Minns, we've got the Public Assembly Restriction Declaration, the PARD, which was what they used to try and stop us marching when Herzog came. And we've also got the ban on slogans including Globalise the Intifada, as well as increased repression in codes of conduct for teachers and public servants. So after Bondi, that entire regime, both federally and state, was set up in an attempt to snuff out what we'd done for 2.5 years of standing up for Palestine. And the visit, wherever it came from, the visit by Isaac Herzog was the icing on that cake. It was a huge cake of genocide denial that they wanted to thrust down our throats. And while we weren't allowed to protest, we were supposed to suck up that this war criminal was going to be transported through Sydney. Now, I think looking at where we are now, I think we can say with the Herzog visit, we absolutely won that round. That thing was a disaster for the pro-genocide forces. And, I think we do have to absolutely celebrate the defiance and the resistance that we saw that night, because, as it became clearer when Herzog's visit was approaching that actually it was going to backfire, that people wanted to demonstrate, that people wanted to march, we saw an imposition of the, special events legislation and a constant barrage through the media saying that, people would not be allowed to gather, the whole thing might be up in the air trying to bully us off the streets. And what did we see? We saw maybe 20,000 people, and we have to hold on to this, coming together with such a, strength of that we have the right to, loudly say that this man is a war criminal and that we want to break ties with Israeli genocide. And what's more, the spirit on the day was that people wanted to march. Not just us, but thousands and thousands of people wanted to march. And in fact, thousands of us did. Even though the PARD was in, by the end of the day, thousands of us marched from Town Hall to Central against those laws and made it very clear that we were prepared to do that again. And I think as a result, we have crushed that element of the PARD. It was, tomorrow night, we're going to march from Town Hall to State Parliament. We're going to call for the slogan of globalise the Intifada, and we're going to, we have managed to push back that element of the repression, which I think is a huge win. And, obviously the police brutality and the public backlash against those laws has put MINS on the back foot in that way. But I think when we look about the actual sort of balance of what's left, the question of the whole PARD itself, it's still in legislation, and people may not know that an element of that legislation says that you can have a 3-month ban on marches in New South Wales if there is a terror offence anywhere around the world. So this is incredible. If we had another October 7 or, something goes down in Iran, whatever, they can actually ban street marches again. So it's an incredibly insidious legislation that was there in the Supreme Court. And I hope they win in the Supreme Court. But if they don't, we're going to need to fight to maintain our right to march regardless. And we still have the Siegel Plan, which is going to be introduced in all the universities. We still have the attacks on teachers, the attacks on public servants. That entire repressive apparatus is there. So what are the lessons from the 1978 Mardi Gras? I think looking at the campaign that was mounted, and it's really, really important what Ken says. At the heart of that, the response to the Mardi Gras were revolutionaries. The phrase that had come out of the US was the Gay Liberation Front. That was taken from the Vietnamese Liberation Front, which was armed anti-imperialist struggle against America in Vietnam. And that was the militancy and the global understanding about imperialism, about the role of the capitalist family in oppressing gay people and queer people and trans people and women. That was the militancy that was leading. But it was also, as well as that sort of ideological understanding, there was a strategic orientation, and I think that's exactly what we need to think about tonight. So after the initial 53, who, as Ken said, heaps of people got out of paddy wagons and ran away, but 53 were arrested on that night. The campaign, there was a really serious drop the charges campaign. And the things that I think are really key at the moment are that campaign sustained the militancy, the defiance that happened on the first Mardi Gras, and also it pushed out. It didn't, it actually campaigned to draw in much larger sections, people from trade unions, people from civil liberties organisations, ALP rank and file members actually, coming together. And I think that's what we need to understand. The first thing I just wanted to, my perspective, which is obviously not eyewitness, but what the significance of the Mardi Gras was. When the 53 were arrested, the Sydney Morning Herald published the names and addresses and ages of everyone who was arrested, and that was a public outing. I mean, they did the same thing to the people arrested at Herzog, but the significance at that time, what happened? Lesbians had their kids taken away, teachers lost their jobs, people were kicked out of rental properties, people were excommunicated from their families, people committed suicide. It just encapsulates the actual deep oppression, the legal right to sack teachers because they were gay. That was where homophobia was at. And as Ken has said, reading some of the interviews at the time, the comrades said that they felt like the movement had kind of hit an upper limit of what could be, how gay rights could be organised, because coming out onto the streets during the day meant outing yourself, it meant risking your job and all of that kind of thing. So the Mardi Gras absolutely blew that out of the water. And I think we have to say, when you think about the people, a few hundred starting at Taylor Square, marching down the street, their sound system and truck gets confiscated, and someone gets on the megaphone and says, "To King's Cross," which is where the, really corrupt, homophobic, cops are based, but also kind of the gay scene. And people start marching up there, and thousands of people had come out of the bars with chants, out of the bars and onto the streets, people came out and actually protested. And when the cops started to, come in on people, they didn't go quietly. They actually marched up to King's Cross, chanting, "Stop police attacks on gays, women and blacks." And I think we have to say, what they did resisting that night for hours, pulling people out of paddy wagons, fighting back against the cops, that is intifada. The repression that people had faced, they stood up in the face of that and liberated themselves from the shame and the humiliation and the way that they'd been treated in society. They fought back. And, the demonstration, even once people were arrested, the whole demo then marched up to the police station at Darlinghurst and all night chanted to let people out while other people were being beaten inside. And, from that very first moment, there was a sense of throwing off, of actually shaking off oppression, which we need to, understand now. Thinking about in the Palestinian Intifada of kids throwing rocks at tanks, well, queer people, sex workers in the cross threw bins of rubbish at the cops that night. There was just a sense of, of fighting off the oppression that people had been suffering. So what did the organised left do, Ken and others, as a response to this? 1 week after the Mardi Gras, there was a mass meeting of thousands of people, that may not be right, hundreds coming together to talk about dropping the charges and how to actually take the movement forward. And then, every week there were 60 to 80 activists coming together in places like the Tin Sheds Gallery at Sydney Uni and down at Glebe, organising. So it wasn't just a matter of we've been brutalised, isn't this awful? It was actually how do we bring in more layers of support? What can we do? How can we take the struggle forward? The New South Wales Summary Offences Act is really important because not only did it allow the cops to arrest gay men in beats, to entrap them, like cops would go in pretending to be gay and then arrest whoever they were picking up. It was used to attack Aboriginal people, it was used to attack lesbians showing same-sex affection on the street, and it was also used to attack street demonstrations. The whole system of, the Mardi Gras actually had a permit. You used to have to go and ask the police for permission to march. And, people will know there's an article in the Solidarity magazine about what was going on in Queensland at the same time as the Mardi Gras, which was the absolute ban, complete ban by Joe Bjelke-Petersen on street marches. So there was this understanding that there is a backlash on civil liberties. But the New South Wales Summary Offences Act, encapsulated all the oppression plus crackdown on the capacity to organise and civil liberties. And I think one of the points I wanted to make about this is, and Ken said it as well, the fight for civil liberties, for the right to march, and the fight for gay liberation and against discriminatory laws, it wasn't that the fight for liberation was suspended in order to fight for the right to march. Actually, the two went hand in hand, and I think we need to understand that as well. When we fight for the right to organise and march for Palestine, we are also fighting for our capacity to win Palestinian liberation, to push back the ties, the millions of ties between the Australian economy and Israeli apartheid. So just to quickly explain as well, the Drop the Charges campaign. So to give you an early taste, the same Monday morning after the Mardi Gras, where the newspaper had printed people's names, 300 people turned up to the court to protest about the people who had been charged. And the police, even though the judge said it's an open court, people can come in, the cops just barricaded it. And so there was, again, 7 were arrested then. 2 weeks later, on the 15th of July, these guys organised a demonstration to retrace the route of the Mardi Gras, and 2,000 people came out, including non-gay supporters, trade unionists, civil liberties people. That was at that time the biggest gay rights demonstration in Australian history. But again, people were arrested at that demonstration. And then the last one I'll mention is on August 27th, there was a big gathering, the fourth homosexual conference in Paddington, and Fred Nile, the pro-life Christian Democrat, organised a Festival of Light, pro-life thing against the gay conference, and 300 people voted to march out of the conference and go down and confront that disgusting pro-life festival going on. And that's important because, again, it shows the explicit understanding for people fighting for gay rights that actually women controlling their bodies is part of the same struggle for liberation. And out of the 300 who marched, 104 were arrested. So what this shows you is from June to August, in 1978, 178 people were arrested as part of this campaign. And I think what that tells us is that it's not enough one and done at the Herzog rally. We need to keep that spirit of defiance at the forefront, just like they did in fighting back in 1978. The wins out of this movement are quite extraordinary, like the repeal of the Summary Offences Act. There's other laws in between, as Ken and I were discussing before, but I think what we need to make very clear is the struggle at the Mardi Gras that won the right to march. In New South Wales, we have the right to march. We put in notice if we want to disrupt traffic, and that's a Form 1. But if the police want to stop us, they have to take us to the Supreme Court, and often they lose. We have the right to march. That has been suspended by Chris Minns under this part of legislation. That's what was won out of the Mardi Gras, and we've got to absolutely make sure that we defend it. And Ken's mentioned some of the really world-leading anti-discrimination legislation and decriminalisation of gay sex that was won out of that campaign as well. So just in summing up, I think we need to take from, exactly as Ken said, the spirit of the time, the militancy was part of an understanding that, the war in Vietnam was just a spearhead of an imperialist system that was part of oppressing people for their sexuality right around the world. And we need to understand that same system today. When we look at Palestine, the people in Minnesota who are standing up against ICE, they feel like they're getting a tiny taste of what's being served up to the Palestinians. That repression, that brutality is coming back to attack migrants in Minnesota. And then we turn up to the Herzog protest and people rightly say, we didn't vote for Trump, so why are we seeing ICE? Why are we seeing these kind of police powers? We need to understand that all of these struggles are connected and that we are going to continue to use the same spirit of defiance that they did in the first Mardi Gras when we say globalise the Intifada. We are going to continue to say that. We'll say that tomorrow night. We'll say that when Parliament comes back. We're going to defend absolutely everyone who says that, and we're going to break this entire regime.